bucka. Haha. You know the deal.
The next thing we're going to talk about in number sense is finding the percent of a number. And to start, we're just going to look at an example of calculating the percent of a number. Finding the percent of a number is a practical application for all sorts of things, but particularly when you're buying something in a store. We have tax on top of purchases, and oftentimes things are on sale. So we're going to talk about how to calculate tax and how to calculate sale price on another video, but this is just an introduction to how to calculate the percent of a number. So the first example we're going to look at here is where we're going to calculate 13% of 275. So we're going to start with 275. What we want to do here is make this into a math sentence. So 275 is already a number, so we can write that in a math sentence just as 275. The next thing we're going to look at is this word of. And if you recall from the video on fractions, that word of, when we translate into a math sentence, it means times. So of we're going to change to multiplication. So the last thing we're going to look at here is the percent. And as we talked about in the previous videos, there are different ways to write percents. And here it's written as a percent, so using the percent symbol. Now there are some calculators that do have a percent button. So you could actually use a calculator like that and just press 13 and then percent and then times 275. But for our purposes, we're going to look at writing this in a math sentence, not as a percent, because there are some calculators where you can't do that. And it's also important to explore just other ways to do this type of question. So as we saw in the previous videos, we can write percents as a percent, as it's written here, or as a fraction, or as a decimal. So in a math sentence here, I could actually write it as either a fraction or a decimal. I'm going to write it as a decimal for this example. And if you recall from the last video, to change a percent to a decimal, well, 13%, the word percent literally means out of 100. So another way to write that, if I wanted to write it as a fraction, it would be 13 out of 100, or 13 over 100. And a fraction is just a division question, as we talked about in the unit on fractions. So the division question there is 13 divided by 100. When we're dividing by 100, we're dividing by a power of 10. So we're going to move the decimal to the left 2 places. It starts there, we're going to move it to the left 2 places. And 13 divided by 100 is 0.13. So when we're finding 13% of 275, to change that into a math sentence, it's 0.13 times 275. Now, we could do this without the use of a calculator, but for the purposes here, let's assume we can use a calculator to calculate that. So when you use your calculator to multiply 0.13 times 275, you get 35.75. So again, to review here, to find the percent of a number, if you recall, that word of translates into multiplication. The number can be just written as a number, and a percent we usually would write as a decimal in a math sentence. We could write it as a fraction, but for our purposes here, we're going to write it as a decimal, and 13% as a decimal is 0.13. And when you use your calculator, you multiply 0.13 times 275, you get 35.75. Now, what does that 35.75 mean? Well, if you recall, a percent is a fraction as well. So 13% is 13 out of 100. And 13 out of 100 is the same as 35.75 out of 275. Now, looking at these two fractions here, it's not so obvious that they're equivalent fractions. But to change 100 to 275, it's not so easy to do, but we do multiply 100 times 2.75 to get 275, and if you multiply 13 times 2.75, it is 35.75, because just as we talked about in our fractions unit, whatever we do to the denominator, we have to do to the numerator. So it's important to understand what this 35.75 means, and it's an equivalent fraction out of 275, where the equivalent fraction is 13 over 100. Let's look at another example where we're calculating the percent of a number. So here we're just going to jump right into it and change this to a math sentence. So to write 25% in a math sentence, I want to write it as a number, not as a percent. So we have to do 25 divided by 100, because percent just literally means divided by 100. And when I do that math, we get 0.25. Of translates into times, and 200 is already a number, so I don't have to change that at all. It can stay as 200. And again here, if you use your calculator to multiply 0.25 times 200, you'll find that it's 50. Now, again, what does that 50 mean? Well, 25% as a fraction is 25 out of 100. And when I'm finding 25% of 200, I'm really finding an equivalent fraction here, where 200 is my denominator. Now this one is a little bit more obvious than the last one. To change 100 to 200, we multiply it by 2. And to change, so what we have to do to 25 then is also multiply it by 2. So again here we can see that when we're finding a percent of a number, we're really finding an equivalent fraction. That's equivalent to the first fraction. So 25 out of 100 is the same as what out of 200. But for practical purposes, if you've got a calculator handy and you just need to quickly find 25% of 200, you can multiply 0.25 times 200. But understanding this equivalent fraction part of it makes it a little bit convenient, because you know that really if you're looking for 25% of a number, well, 25 out of 100 is the same as 1 out of 4. We can divide both of those by 25. So if you're finding 25% of a number, you're really finding a quarter of a number. And again, a quarter of 200. If we change that to a math sentence, is 1 over 4 times 200. And 200 written as a fraction is 200 over 1. We could reduce in the question here, but I'll just go ahead and simplify that. 1 times 200 is 200, and 4 times 1 is 4, and then 200 divided by 4 is 50. So again, so you can see here there's a few different ways to look at how to calculate a percent. I mean, yes, we can change it into a math sentence. Just change that percent to a decimal, and then multiply it times the number to give us our answer. But understanding that what we're really looking for here is, when we're looking for 25% of 200, we're looking for an equivalent fraction. 25 out of 100 is the same as something out of 200. And with this one, it's a little bit quicker to realize, well, that's 50. You don't necessarily need to go through the step of multiplying 0.25 times 200 to get that. Let's look at one last example of where we're calculating the percent of a number. But in this case, I don't know what the number is. I'm just writing this English sentence calculating 8% of a number. So the number here is unknown. So I want to translate this into a math sentence. Well, the first thing I'm going to translate here is the percent. So when I have to write 8% as a decimal, or as a number, I have to do the math there. And this is an example of one that students very often get wrong, when they have to write a single-digit percent as a decimal. So if you remember, 8% means 8 over 100. And 8 over 100 means 8 divided by 100. When we divide by 100, we have to move the decimal 2 places to the left. So if I move it just one place to the left, I haven't moved it enough. So I have to actually put a 0 in front of that 8. So when we divide 8 divided by 100, it equals 0.08. Remember, the decimal started here, and we moved it 2 places to the left. So 8% as a decimal is 0.08. The next part we're going to look at here is translating this part, which is a number. Now, I don't know what the number is, so what we have to do here is we have to assign a variable to that to translate it into a math sentence. So we would usually have our let statement at this point, and I'll just say, well, let's say let y represent a number. So I'm going to write that part of our sentence here. Well, of, we know, means multiply. Now that I'm using some algebra here, I want to try to stay away from using that symbol x for multiplying because it's very often used as a variable. So here I've actually written 8% of a number, because when we put the number right next to the letter like that in algebra, it means we're multiplying. The math that we have in there, the operation that we have in there is multiplying. So this is how we would calculate 8% of a number, 0.08 times y. Now suppose y was equal to 7. To find 8% of 7, it would be 0.08 times 7, which equals 0.56. So 8% of 7 is 0.56. To finish off our lesson on finding the percent of a number, I'm going to ask you to answer a couple of questions here. Just calculate each one of these percents. And you can use any method that you want that were discussed in this video. For question number 1, calculate 12% of 50, and so on. If you're able to do that, congratulations. You now have a firm understanding of how to calculate the percent of a number.